Ghost Recon Breakpoint is the sequel to Ghost Recon Wildlands. It features squad and class-based online multiplayer with up to 3 of your best friends. Here, on Aroa, it's just you and your wits against a squad of hundreds led by Cole Walker, your ex-squad captain. You fight for the archipelago's freedom in a sprawling open world that features visually different and distinct biomes with a ton of ways to travel between cars, motorcycles, helicopters, and boats. A variety of guns, gear, and gadgets are all at your disposal, including a drone for doing some safe recon, all tied together by a huge skill tree that gives you bonuses and extra abilities. I'm just listing facts about the game because I'm having trouble coming up with anything to really say about Ghost Recon Breakpoint. And that's a bummer. It makes me worry for how the next Watch Dogs game is going to be out when I really liked Watch Dogs 2. Then again, Watch Dogs 2 had its own issues. I very much preferred my own time there compared to here. All of the things that Watch Dogs 2 was touching on is something that I was really interested in, especially when it came to the dialogue. Somebody put a good amount of nerd love into the dialogue, and whether or not it was forced, I really enjoyed it. I think constantly about the conversation that a couple of the characters have about who's better, the alien and the predator, Betty or Veronica, and it's a conversation that goes from one place to another, and it keeps your interest, and it follows through, and the jokes are good. I can't think of anything Breakpoint does like that. I struggled last night coming up with a list of things the game does well, or even really does right, and by the end of the game, I had been wishing it was over already for about 10 hours. Aroa is massive, it's huge, it's one of the biggest maps I've ever had to traverse in a game recently, which ultimately is a huge flaw. The fastest way from A to B is always by helicopter. The game tells you to take a helicopter at every turn, and the map is why. Say you start from your home base in Erewhon or any of the available fast travel bivouac camps where you can just spawn a helicopter, and your objective is 10 kilometers away. If you're playing single player, have a podcast ready. To go any distance, it takes far too long, even flying on a direct route. Now, it may not be as long as it feels, but there's nothing to do or distract you besides hold forward on the left stick. So you take your time to fly over, you complete an objective, and you head back for your reward. Congratulations, that 15 to 20 minutes you spent in the mission area were lengthened to over a half an hour in travel time alone, and that just keeps adding up. It's one thing when a game gives you something to find, or maybe a side mission, or hidden reward, or something, because you made the trek between point A and point B, but here, the game just wastes your time, simply because of the massive size of this open world. Ubisoft has a habit of making all of their games and their worlds a little too open, and populating that map with far too little. There are points of interest and things to explore, sure, but they don't really compel a character to check them out. This game is like one of those abandoned shacks that litter the map. If they spend the time and spend the energy and spend the effort, players will find that there's nothing really of value to be found there. Normally the game runs fine. Load times are long, but that's nothing new. There aren't many cases where I've had to come across stuttering, except in one mission where I captured and pulled this named NPC across a base, and the frame rate dipped to about 15 frames per second every time he was on screen. But the actions and animations of NPCs for the world seem relatively well optimized, except for a few times where I saw Jace Skell slide into his chair from nowhere. The major issue with the game, technically, is the UI and how the player can control it and interact with it. I constantly had to close and reopen the game from the console's menu for one reason: the drone. The world is full of things to see. You can use your drone to identify these places, which will mark them on your map for you. You can also use the drone for base recon, and it'll mark enemies you point at. Sometimes as you're flying it through an enemy base, you'll find all of the sudden, enemies just won't mark anymore. Every single time it's due to the drone marking a location in the environment and that little loading bar getting stuck. The drone becomes useless for its main purpose until you force close. Logging out and logging back in in the main menu will not fix this issue. There's a bunch of little bugs in the game that break because of these interactables. Ladders become unclimbable, walls unscalable, gadgets and items can't and won't be used, and in one instance, I couldn't fire, aim, or reload my guns for a solid about 5 minutes while getting shot at by a squad, because I guess I pressed square near a ladder or something. Why? Why does that happen? Using your items can just break your experience for a short time, suddenly and randomly. It's annoying at best, but again, at worst, it requires a full reboot. Closing it out, opening it back up again, loading, and loading. And an issue like this happened every single time I played the game. Stealth, the bread and butter in Breakpoint, is not hard. A little awareness bar fills up when an enemy spots you, and you have a moment to take them out before the base is put on alert. Think Metal Gear Solid 5, but not as forgiving. So eventually, I stopped using the drone. I couldn't rely on it not to break my game. In the sharpshooter tree, it gives you these sensor grenades that automatically mark a huge area. I use those instead. It takes time and patience to go into a base silently, stealthily, eliminating soldiers systematically and moving all their bodies. There are gadgets that help with this, like the sync shot drone. It'll mark a few targets that fire in your command, and the game advertises that with a whole squad's help, you can eliminate up to 12 enemies at once. But every single time, every single base, I was spotted. After spending time trying to play the game as intended, I failed constantly, so I had to rely on my guns. There's a lot of guns in the game, the difference is mostly being in fire rate, and they're customizable fully, from adding all rail accessories or different sights or color, but for the most part, keeping guns stock works best, since I was getting new guns frequently. The shooting itself is fine, there's very little bullet drop over distance, and recoil is manageable, but when all hell breaks loose, having an assault rifle or shotgun works really well. Enemies die from headshots pretty much no matter what, unless they're a drone or an automated turret, of course, which have their own weak points or weaknesses to gadgets. There's something to be said about the amount of time spent in stealth versus the amount of time you spend in combat. Stealth takes a ton of time and a lot of effort to not be seen, but there are no bonuses to be had from it. If you're spotted and you cleared a whole base, you continue on with your objective as if nothing had changed. Nothing is hidden or moved or taken or made different in the mission. It's understandable making a game where any player with any skill set can pick it up and succeed even when they may not have a handle on stealth, but it's sort of defeating the purpose. This invalidates stealth completely. For a game centered on stealth, for a series that was once about perfect execution and timing, for a game where you expected to be like a ghost, it gives you more success from entering firefights to begin with, so you can clear missions faster and get rewarded with that sweet, sweet loot. In games like Destiny 2 and the latest Far Cry, your gear drops are leveled. This keeps your gear score at an average of all of your combined pieces of gear, and it's a system I absolutely despise. As stated before, enemies die in one headshot. This goes for any gear level across the board. At one point, I stumbled across a level 150 area where I was over 100 levels under, and still succeeded in clearing the area out. Well, almost. Gear score seems to really only apply to two things: damage reduction and your own damage to robots. As your gear score levels up, you'll take less damage from enemies under your level, and this damage reduction allows you to survive encounters with high-level enemies, as long as you are relatively comparable. All of this goes out the window with drones. Drones and automated turrets will rip you in half like you were tissue paper, if you are too far under their gear level that they are at. In return, you'll feel like you're shooting them with a water gun. So instead, you grind it out. You're doing missions or killing very high-level enemies with headshots to get better drops. You then return, clear the area, and move on, again and again. The grind continues. You amass huge piles of gear and keep only the best and the strongest. It makes sense. But all of it's arbitrary, so with the amount of gear and weapons you pick up during the course of one single mission will be basically invalidated by the next mission. Or even potentially the next enemy, for that matter. The intense focus of the gear system is deeply and inherently tied to the shop and the microtransactions within. Currently at launch, there are over 100 individual pieces of microtransaction, and that number can only go up. I have a suspicion that the game only features this many to appeal to specific needs, to let you know that the solution to your problem is just right there. The most egregious problems have been removed, of course, the experience and skill boosters, but there are still microtransactions in for the money in the in-game economy, and for consumable weapon parts. Paying real-world money for a thing that will just disappear when you use it. That doesn't mean the boosters can't just be re-added again near the holidays or on the release of a major raid, and that doesn't fix the problems with progression at hand right now, near launch. The only character you can even come close to caring about is the main bad guy, Captain Walker. He's played by John Bernthal, and he was a huge push for the game by Ubisoft. He came out on stage at E3 accompanied by a dog, and everybody loved the fact that he brought out a dog, and he announced his involvement in this incredible action game franchise.
I'm enormously proud to be part of the development of this game.
His performance is not great.
What are you gonna do, sir? You gonna charge me? You know something that'd be worth it? This here's about what's right.
It's fine, it's not bad, it's just really middle of the road. For an actor that has played really interesting and deep, violent characters, like in The Walking Dead, or when he was the Punisher, it seems to be lacking a lot. I find that comes in the facial capture, which can pretty much be said about every single NPC. In fact, much like his performance, the game itself is just not that interesting. A lot of mistakes and bugs and issues could just simply be overlooked if the game was more fun. When you have to play a game and you're not having a good time, and you bring your friends in and you start having a good time, that doesn't mean the game itself is fun. Your friends are fun. I spend a lot of time thinking about video games. It's my hobby, of course, so it's what I choose to sink my time into. Constantly, I wonder what makes a game good. Why I think, say, Fallout New Vegas still stands as one of the best games of all time. It's not a fair comparison, but let me continue. There's issues with that game, mostly revolving around the engine. Yes, there's animation problems. But the dialogue and the atmosphere are top-notch, and the pros heavily outweigh the cons. It's an enjoyable experience, even if the potential bugs and crashes and problems hinder your time playing, because it feels like there's always something interesting to see or someone complex to talk to over the next hill. It's playable. I didn't come across any game-breaking bugs. It's not the best game I've ever played. It's also far from the worst. Ultimately, I feel this game is completely missable. If you're thinking about picking this up, you could absolutely skip it and really miss nothing new or innovative or interesting. And that's kind of the worst thing a game can be. Boring. You can spend your money elsewhere and probably have a much better time. I'm Richard Jellison for VGS.